I am so happy and so excited to be talking today to Nicole Terez Dutton. Nicole is the editor-in-chief at the Kenyon Review, but she is also an amazing poet. Her book, If One of Us Should Fall, is well worth your time. And I'm delighted that she's agreed to talk to us a little bit about her work as an editor, but also about negotiating that sort of balance between being a writer and being an editor, and how those paths sort of intertwine and where they depart. So thank you so much, Nicole, for joining us for this today.
Thank you for the invitation. It's great to be with you.
Thanks. So I wanted to begin just by asking you to tell us a little bit about your story as an editor. And I know that way leads on to way, and that, reading and writing and language were passions of yours from a very young age, from things I've read that you have talked about. But if you could talk especially about what drew you into editing, and what choices you made in order to pursue that or to learn things that would be useful to you in that kind of role. That would be a great place for us to start.
Sure. I feel like the actual progress of moving into an editing position as a full-time job, which I love, has been sort of a series of very happy accidents. So, I was writing and I was in the academy and participating in all kinds of events around literature. I feel like I had the really great fortune of going to the Fine Arts Work Center in Provincetown and then serving as a part of their jury to select the incoming fellows, which I'd never participated in a process like that. And that was, first of all, that was the first experience that I had in being in conversation with writers and readers and looking at work that closely. Of course, it was for a different purpose. It was for just the selection committee, but it was really, I would say that was really inspiring moment. That process is it's really controlled and it's really designed to be balanced and fair. And so there was a lot of conversation, a lot of close reading and a lot of generosity. And so I felt like through that, I learned a lot from all of these really beautiful poets who were looking through the work and really carefully considering it over the course of many months. And then I also just found that I just so enjoyed that kind of attentive, active reading of work. So that was one thing. And then I would say that I was teaching and working and teaching and working and eventually, through teaching at Grub Street, I met a person who worked at Transition Magazine, and they recommended that I look into the opportunity there as an editorial assistant. And so I went to Transition Magazine, which is published out of the Hutchinson Center at Harvard, and it's a beautiful international magazine that focuses on the diaspora and literature of the diaspora. I would say art and literature of the diaspora. And so I started there working with Sarah Bruya, who is incredible. And she was the managing editor at the time. And I really feel like she was incredibly kind and patient in just helping me to understand process and helping me to understand how to set editorial standards and also to sort of begin to curate the kinds of issues that we wanted to put out. And so she was really encouraging. Anytime there was a dossier or an idea that I had, she would just give me the latitude to run it down and to reach out to people and try to build up that portion of the magazine. So that was great. And I feel like I did learn a lot working with her. And then she stepped away, and then I was able to be the managing editor, both for that magazine and for the Du Bois Review, which is an academic journal. And that is like a sociology academic journal. Really different process, really different field, really different audience, everything about it different. However, it was one of those kinds of instances where it was a quick ramp up, learning a lot of skills, and again, just sort of assessing the work and pushing it through a slightly different editorial process um, that was useful for me to engage. I feel like I, expanded kind of my capacity to look at all different work pretty quickly and closely and make those sort of determinations and also, do a lot of the legwork to move the production along.
Yeah.
So both of those, all of those kinds of things, I would say just aligned in ways that were magical and unexpected and really, really profitable.
Yeah. Yeah. So, talk to us too then just a little bit about the sort of attitudes that you've cultivated as an editor that require you to maybe not totally turn off, right? But to sort of set aside your disposition as a writer. How are those two things different for you?
I would say that the thing that I feel like I'm really confronted with most, and this is consistent with working at Transition and working for the Review. There's so many pieces of strong work, that are great beginnings. Not all of them are publication ready, but a lot of them show extraordinary promise. And so there is always this kind of looking at what your actual resources, what resources you can put towards or invest in a piece, and then what we can just kind of push forward and move forward with, ahead to publication. Those aren't always the same thing. So for me, one of the things that I have to set aside, we always look at the work and we want to make edits or suggestions or think about the work in terms of what it is, look at it on its own terms and what it's trying to accomplish. In other words, not what my personal taste or choices might dictate, but really kind of how do we honor what the work seems to want to achieve, and offer the feedback that will do that. And then the other thing that undercuts that always is just how much time do we have to invest in particular pieces to get them there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that leads me to something else that I think probably a lot of people are curious about as writers who are thinking about sending their work to journals, whether that's academic work or whether that is more creative writing. And I guess to a lot of people who are in that boat, sort of the process of what the editor does and how those decisions are made is pretty uncertain. So can you talk to us a little bit about what you think writers who are submitting work should know about sort of the processes of editors, and maybe also just as a bonus, the pet peeves of editors?
I think it's important, I like to separate the creative act from the submission act, that the creative from let's say the professional act of writing. And I feel like as you're in that creative mode and you're writing, your commitments are to the work. And I would say that the professional part of that is really just placing it and being hopeful that it gets the time and attention that you feel it deserves. And those feel to me like two really separate things. So I would say I would try to cultivate a practice of submitting work that feels unemotional and feels like a chore, or feels like, I shouldn't say chore because that seems like there's something pejorative there, but it is like it's a maintenance kind of aspect of the that should be done with regularity, as long as you feel that the work is you've taken it as far as you can take it and that's ready for publication. Then I would say put it out there and try to put it into places where you feel like it's in company and it's in conversation with the other work you've seen those journals publish. So I would say that is one thing to do, and then I would say that once you submit it, it really is, it's out of your hands. And I know we always are hopeful, but I would say you don't have to worry about it anymore. Maybe don't, hope for the best and then move on and keep on writing new things and keep on editing and revising and keep on sending sending them out broadly. And I say that because I do think that the process, at least at the review, it's so hard to guess what anyone is looking for or what might best fit with a process anywhere. So at the review, we have 97 student associates right now who are actively reviewing the slush pile. We had 8,000 submissions when we opened for a 2-week period in September in 2020. So we are very much in the process of reviewing all of those manuscripts. And there's not a single manuscript that comes through that doesn't have at least 3 different sets of eyes on it. What usually happens, things come through the general slush, which is the vast majority, of the work that we receive comes through the slush. It's looked at by 3 associates, and then it is sent up to consulting editors who review it again. And if they find that it's strong and compelling, then they send it up to one of the genre editors, and then they have a look at it, and then it's sent up to me. And I sit down and sort of make a determination as to whether or not it fits best online in KRO, or if it's something for the book. The book is limited, obviously, it's a certain number of pages. And KRO is not as limited. We have a lot more flexibility there in terms of timing and in terms of kind of how we want to arrange particular pieces, kind of to be in conversation with each other, or to be sort of constellations of ideas with each other. But still, we have to make an assessment of where that work fits best. And I will say that so much of that for me, it's like by the time the pieces reach me, they're brilliant, they're wonderful. They've been looked at by everyone, and there's enthusiasm, that supports those publications, or supports them being published. So it's not a judgment call as to whether or not they're good enough. It's whether or not they work within either of those issues.
Yeah.
And there have been cases, for example, where I've looked at work and seen, wow, there's these trends, or there's a conversation that's emerging, and we want to build on this. And so then I will take those and intentionally place them in a particular issue, and actively seek other materials that may deepen and productively complicate that conversation.
Yep.
But again, like that's impossible for a writer to guess or to gauge. I hope that's a little bit illuminating about our process and my thought process as I receive the pieces.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you were then to choose sort of a metaphor for what you do as an editor, would you say, what I do as an editor is I am sort of a guide for conversation, or I'm a curator, or I'm a gatekeeper, or what do you feel like would be a strong metaphor for the work of the editor in the best sense?
I think I typically think of it as an act of curation, but I also, I'm also someone who's really, really invested in not only expanding the conversation and making sure that we have a diversity of voices represented in every issue. Like, I feel like that's a really important aspect of my job, is to make a way and to celebrate and uplift voices and people who maybe don't seem to have managed to have be able to stand in their own light. And I want to make sure that those people, and working from whatever kind of literary traditions they're working within, are represented. So I would say both of those things, which feels a little bit, it's like a curator activist or something, a little more assertive, kind of in just making a way. And I say that because I feel like I'm someone for whom I have had the blessing of people looking out for me and making a way for me, and in nurturing me. And so that is something that I feel has been, that's something that's been demonstrated as a practice to me. And it's because that has been my experience. I I feel like that's a way of learning, and I would honor my teachers by doing the same.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, that leads me to something that you said when you were interviewed, I think by Kenyon's student newspaper, when you took the job at Kenyon Review as the editor-in-chief. And you talked about the kind of thing that led you into editing, but also the thing that made you really happy about filling that role is this desire to bring attention to artists who you felt like were underrepresented or left out of the spotlight, right? And as you're talking about that, it occurs to me that not only are there these gaps and these lacks in terms of different writers' voices and in terms of not enough people having the chance to read these different writers' voices, but also, just to be quite forthright about it, publishing and editing just as an industry, as a field, tends not to be very diverse. So what would you say in terms of ways that both people within the industry, but also people trying to make their way as editors who have perhaps not been drawn into the spotlight for the things they've accomplished, what advice would you give to both those groups? So to the publishing industry, but also to the people who have been underrepresented, but are trying to make their way? I know it's a big one.
But the other thing is that things are changing.
Mm-hmm.
And those changes may be slow and perhaps overdue, but they are changing. And so I feel really hopeful. And I feel like other people are around me are also hopeful and excited and enthusiastic. And so I would never, I would lean into that, I would lean into that and doing great work and having great ideas is, there's always going to be a need and a space for that. And I would look toward people who seem like they're trying to cultivate a different kind of readership and promote work in different ways. I would look to those people and make them aware of you and the work that you're doing. Because I have to say that it's been my experience personally that I've always been surprised in such a warm way by how open and receptive people are if you just reach out to them and you introduce yourself and you ask them. I think writers and editors and people in the industry recognize that people need, you need things, you need help. Like you're not really accomplishing anything by yourself ever. Like that just doesn't, that doesn't really happen. And so there are these, I think there is the expectation that people need to be mentored. But when you reach out and you let someone know that you're ready for that, it makes it that much easier for them to open a door and step towards you, because you're doing all of the things that do seem worthy of time and attention and help. And that's really exciting. So I've been really surprised by how receptive people have been to me. And I would encourage everyone to do that, to ask for help when you need it, to be, as professional and prepared as you can, to look for all of the learning opportunities that are around you. And then to, like I said, to take a step towards someone who you think you may want to work with, or you would like to at least be in conversation with,
Yeah. Yeah. So one last question. And I'm thinking here about the person who loves books, loves writing, loves reading, and loves hearing about this conversation and the ways it's shaped, but is just in a place where they're at the very beginning, right? They've never maybe even thought about the fact that to be an editor is a vocation that they could seek out. In terms of, say, for a college student or someone who's thinking about sort of a change in career, but very first steps, what would you sort of guide them toward as a way in or as something that they could begin to learn or to seek out as, yeah, a first step, as a start?
As ever, it seems to me that it never hurts to read broadly. And so I would pay attention to the things that you already love. And then I would pay attention in that kind of critical way. So if there are publications that are incredible that you find yourself reading or that you can't live without, I would look really carefully at that publication and kind of examine how it's put together and what trends you see, or what kind of approaches you see the people who are responsible for those decisions making. I would look at that really carefully, and I would look broadly and compare and contrast and see. I mean, that's one of the things that I feel like I'm always doing right now is I love to look at other journals and see what they're up to and what they're thinking about. And I think that's part of my work because I want to make sure like this is also kind of an extension of my answer for the question you just asked me. Like it all comes down to community. And so you're in community with folks. And so you reach out and you connect with them, but then, you want to look at that as journals are also in community with other kind of journals and productions. And we're part of the same moment. So we're, ostensibly, it's a part of the same conversation. So it's important to look at how we're interacting and where we're meeting. And then also it's not really a zero-sum game. So to look at how we can kind of deepen those connections and work together is something that's interesting to me. But I would say for a beginning person, it would be, I think, useful to look at that entire literary landscape and see who's making beautiful noise and who's putting work together that's exciting and the map the way that it moves you and think about that. Maybe an easy kind of way to start sort of cultivating that sense of what you like and what your priorities are and what you would like to accomplish by virtue of this curatorial effort or the kinds of projects that might be fascinating or enriching for you to do. And I would say also part of that would be to look at these holes or omissions or erasures and how can you speak meaningfully to those? What projects do we need right now in this moment? And where do we need to go? And can we build something, that would be a vehicle to bring us together to that kind of point in understanding or point in the conversation. I think those are important things to think about and reading. Probably an easy way to do that. I would also say that I really learn a lot by just looking at other people and how they've maneuvered. I was a cross country runner, and I remember the fastest kid on my team. I asked him, I pulled him aside this one time, and I said, "How do you do that? Like, how do you just do that?" And he said, "I look at the person's feet, whoever's in front of me. I look at their feet, and I do what they do, and then I just hang on." And then in the end, I overtake them. That's very simple. That's very easy, but it's true. You just look at how people, what they have done. You can reach out and ask them, but right now we're just in this moment of pandemia where everybody is being interviewed, and you can go on YouTube and you can actually see conversations where people talk about their journeys and their experiences and how they maneuvered. And I think that there's much to be said and learned about just reviewing someone else's journey.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Thank you so much. And thank you for letting us try to keep up with you and run behind you and look at your feet through this interview. Just to repeat, I am talking to Nicole Terez Dutton. I'm very grateful to her, both as the author of If One of Us Should Fall and as the editor of the Kenyon Review. And thank you so much for joining us for this bit at the Center for Faith and Writing.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.